I swiped my badge at the first checkpoint, nodding to the guard. 6 more to go. The same ritual I'd performed 5 days a week for 15 years. "Morning, Hughes," said the guard, barely looking up from his monitor. "Morning, Carl." The pool never changed. That was part of its design. Consistency, predictability, control. The facility was in the middle of the North Pacific, 200 miles from Hawaii, keeping its secrets safe. I walked through the decontamination chamber at checkpoint 2, arms raised while scanners checked for anything I shouldn't be bringing inside. The usual hiss of sanitizing spray filled the small room before the green light blinked and the door slid open. Checkpoint 3, retinal scan. 4, voice print. 5, hand geometry. 6, weight distribution analysis. 7, full body millimeter wave scan. By the time I reached my workstation in the research wing, 43 minutes had passed since I'd stepped off the helicopter onto the landing pad. Security was thorough by design. My desk sat among 20 identical stations arranged in a semicircle around the central display. Above us, the domed ceiling glowed with artificial daylight that stayed the same intensity, no matter the weather outside or time of day. Below us, through reinforced glass flooring in the center of the room, was the object. I logged into my terminal and brought up yesterday's data maps. The object floated in its chamber, breaking the laws of gravity in ways we still didn't understand after decades of study. It was perfectly smooth, slightly oblong, and about the size of a bus. It absorbed light in ways that made it difficult to look at directly. Not black, not transparent, just wrong somehow. I'd spent 15 years mapping its atomic structure, and we'd barely scratched the surface of understanding it. And then there was the sound. A low buzz that vibrated just at the edge of hearing. Some new researchers couldn't detect it at all. Others got so bothered by it they asked for transfers within weeks. I'd gotten used to it, like living near train tracks or an airport. It became part of the background noise of life. "Anything interesting in the overnight data?" Daniel Cooper asked, sliding into the workstation beside mine. I shook my head. "Same patterns as yesterday, and the day before that." "That's job security," he said with a thin smile. The morning briefing started at 800 sharp. Director William Peterson stood at the front of the room, his silver hair catching the artificial light as he flipped through his tablet. "No significant changes in the object's metrics overnight," he announced to the room of 30 researchers. "Thermal output remains constant at 19.2 degrees Celsius. Gravitational field stable at negative 0.021 newtons per kilogram. Radiation signatures unchanged. We'll continue with standard mapping protocols today, with teams 3 and 7 focusing on the southern quadrant. Standard, unchanged, stable, constant. These words defined our work at the pool. The object was found in Antarctic ice 27 years ago, dating back at least 12,000 years before humans. It never changed in all that time. I went to my station and started my day's work. I spent hours recording atomic positions, measuring density, and tracking energy outputs. The job needed focus and patience. I did the familiar tasks while my mind wandered. At 1 p.m., I took my lunch break in the common area. The cafeteria had the same menu every 2 weeks. Tuesday was turkey sandwiches and tomato soup. I ate quickly and went to the communication room for my weekly video call with Emily. The comm room was built for privacy, small booths with soundproofing and secure connections to the outside world. I sat in booth 3 and started the call. After a few seconds, Emily appeared on screen. Her red hair was shorter than when I left 6 weeks ago. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "You cut your hair." She touched it self-consciously. "Just a trim. How's the platform?" The same old lie was there as usual. Oil platform engineer. That's what my cover story had been from the start. It explained the isolation, the long rotations away, the security, and the non-disclosure agreements. Same as always. Lots of maintenance, lots of ocean. I kept my voice light, searching for something true I could tell her. "I saw a pod of dolphins yesterday. There had been dolphins near the facility last week. That much wasn't a lie. That sounds nice. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The house is good. Mrs. Abernathy's cat got into the yard again, but otherwise nothing exciting. We talked about normal things for 20 minutes. Her job teaching second grade, a movie she'd seen, plans for when I came home in 2 more weeks. The conversation felt hollow, like we were just going through the motions. "I miss you," I said as our time wound down. "I miss you too." She paused, looking away from the camera. "James, when you get back, we should talk. About us. About the future." My stomach tightened. I knew what "we should talk" meant. 15 years of half-truths and absences had taken their toll. I couldn't blame her. "Yeah," I said. "We should." After we disconnected, I sat in the booth for an extra minute, trying to push away the empty feeling in my chest. This was the price of the work. They'd warned me during recruitment that maintaining relationships would be difficult. What they hadn't mentioned was how the lying would make you feel completely empty inside. Back at my workstation, I plugged in my earbuds and resumed mapping. The afternoon was going to be long, 12 hours of detailed analysis with just coffee breaks and shift changes. Daniel had moved to the testing lab, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the data. At 16:42, I noticed it. A small change in the object's usual sound. I pulled out one earbud, then both, turning my head to better catch the difference. The change was subtle, a slight change in the pitch, like the frequency had changed by a few hertz. Most people wouldn't notice it at all. I checked the acoustic monitoring systems. The readouts showed normal parameters, nothing flagged by the automated systems. I adjusted the sensitivity and ran a comparison against the baseline from this morning. There it was, a 0.3% change in the harmonic pattern. Tiny, but real. I documented the change in my log and continued working, recording the exact time and what I'd heard. Probably nothing significant. The object occasionally showed minor changes that went back to normal within hours. Still, I found myself listening more carefully as I worked, feeling tense for no clear reason. The small hairs on my arms stood up as I bent over my equipment. Something felt different. After 15 years of sameness, of routine, this tiny change made me feel nervous. I had no idea that this small change in the usual pattern would be just the beginning. Things were about to change in ways I couldn't imagine, completely changing what I thought I knew about reality. I continued watching the object's sound change well past when my shift was supposed to end. Even after logging the unusual reading, I wanted to stay and listen more carefully to that small change in the noise. After years of the same sound, even this tiny shift felt huge. By the time I finally left my workstation, the night crew had already taken their positions around the research floor. The building never slept. Scientists worked in rotating shifts, making sure the object was watched every second of every day. The walk back to my room took 9 minutes exactly. I timed it years ago and found comfort in knowing it wouldn't change. Tonight, though, I found myself stopping at hallway intersections, listening for that change sound. It was faint, but still there as I walked through the clean hallways. Sleep came slowly. My thoughts kept going back to that 0.3% change, wondering if it would be gone by morning or if it meant something more. Eventually, I fell asleep to the sound of the air system and the distant, changed noise. Morning arrived with the same exact timing as always. The lights in my room gradually got brighter to copy sunrise, though no natural light ever reached this deep into the building. I showered, dressed in my standard navy jumpsuit, and headed to the cafeteria for breakfast. The routine felt normal. Oatmeal with dried fruit on Wednesdays, coffee in the same white mug I always used. I ate quickly, nodding to colleagues but avoiding conversation. The small talk at the pool was as controlled as everything else. Weather reports from the outside world, progress on research projects, countdown to rotation end. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. At 07:43, I began the familiar journey to my workstation, badge ready for the sequence of checkpoints. The security guard seemed more alert than usual, or maybe I was just paying more attention. When I reached my desk, I stopped cold. There, sitting right in the middle of my otherwise clean workstation, was a yellow post-it note. The bright color stood out against the gray and white environment of the pool. I looked around. Other researchers were logging in, checking equipment, preparing for the day. No one was watching me or the note. I picked it up and read the message written in blue ink. "You have to leave now." The handwriting was clearly mine. The same slightly cramped letters, the same way I crossed my T's with a long horizontal line. But I hadn't written it. I never used post-its at my workstation. They weren't part of our approved supplies. I felt my pulse quicken as I turned the note over, looking for any other message. Nothing. Just those 6 words in my handwriting. The meaning hit me all at once. Someone had gotten into my secure workstation. Someone who could perfectly copy my handwriting. Or I turned to my computer and pulled up the security footage from the previous night. The system needed my fingerprint to access recordings of my own workspace, a safety measure to prevent researchers from messing with each other's data. The timestamp showed 22:01 to 08, covering the hours after I'd left. I fast-forwarded through empty footage, watching the cleaning staff come and go at their scheduled times. Then, at 02:17, movement caught my eye. I rewound and played at normal speed, feeling shocked at what I saw. A man who looked exactly like me walked into frame. Not similar, identical. Same face, same navy jumpsuit, same facility ID badge hanging from the same pocket. My double sat at my workstation, pulled a yellow post-it pad from his pocket, and wrote something quickly. The angle made it impossible to see what he wrote, but he peeled off the note and placed it in the center of my desk. Then my double looked directly at the camera, his face. My face, serious and determined. His lips moved, saying something the camera couldn't capture. The footage continued as Daniel entered the frame. He and my double spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Daniel looked alarmed, his hands moving as if arguing. My double handed him something small. It looked like a data chip, before stepping back. What happened next made me hit pause, rewind, and play again 3 times. My double simply disappeared. One moment he was there, the next a brief flash of light bleached out the camera for a split second, and he was gone. Daniel stood alone, staring at the empty space where my copy had been. The security footage showed Daniel looking around nervously, then pocketing whatever my double had given him before hurrying out of frame. The timestamp read 02:26. I closed the security feed, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. The pool had the most advanced security systems on the planet. No one could enter without passing through 7 checkpoints, and no one could simply disappear into thin air. I needed to find Daniel. I headed straight for the cafeteria, where he usually took his morning coffee. The breakfast crowd was thinning out as most researchers headed to their stations for the 080 briefing. I spotted Daniel at his usual table in the corner, stirring his coffee while reading something on his tablet. "Daniel," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "We need to talk." He looked up, mild surprise on his face. "Morning, James. What's up?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "Did you come to my workstation last night, around 0200? Daniel's expression didn't change, but his hand stopped stirring. "No. I was in my quarters after 2100. I just watched security footage of you talking to someone at my workstation at E0217. A brief look of something, alarm, recognition, crossed his face, but it disappeared quickly. Must be a glitch in the system. I didn't leave my quarters. The footage shows you talking to someone who looks exactly like me. He gave you something. A data chip, I think." Daniel's eyes darted to the left, then back to me. He pushed his chair back slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, James. Maybe you should take a break. That mapping work can mess with your head after a while. Daniel, I know what I saw. You were there. I pulled the yellow note from my pocket, and whoever he was, he left this on my desk. Daniel glanced at the note but didn't take it. His face had gone pale. I have to get to the lab. The director doesn't like us being late for briefing. He stood up, coffee forgotten. Wait. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. I can't help you, James. His voice had dropped to a whisper. I really can't. I watched him walk away, his shoulders tight with tension. He was lying. I was certain of it. The morning briefing started on time, as always. Director Peterson went through the usual updates, not mentioning any security incidents or anomalies. I sat at my station, barely listening, the yellow note burning a hole in my pocket. After the briefing, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept circling back to the security footage and Daniel's strange reaction. By mid-morning, I'd made no progress on my assigned mapping sector. I needed answers, and Director Peterson was the only one with the authority to access all facility systems. I sent a meeting request through the internal messaging system, marked urgent. The response came 20 minutes later. Office, 12:30. At exactly 12:30, I knocked on the director's door. Enter, came the clipped response. William Peterson's office was as plain and cold as the man himself. No personal items were on the metal desk or gray walls. The only decoration was a large facility map hung behind his chair. Hughes. He nodded toward the chair across from him. What's so urgent? I sat down, choosing my words carefully. Sir, I believe we may have a security breach. His eyebrows raised slightly. Explain. This morning I found this on my workstation. I placed the yellow note on his desk. I didn't write it, but it's my handwriting. Peterson glanced at the note without touching it. And I checked the security footage. It shows someone who looks exactly like me entering the facility last night, writing this note, and then disappearing. Literally vanishing after speaking with Daniel Cooper. Peterson's face remained impassive, but his fingers began tapping a slow rhythm on his desk. Have you spoken with Cooper about this? Yes, sir. He denied being there, but the footage clearly shows him. Peterson leaned back in his chair. Hughes, how long have you been at the pool? 15 years, sir. And in that time, have you ever experienced any unusual thoughts, hallucinations, paranoia? The question caught me off guard. No, sir. Never. The mind is a complex thing, Hughes. Extended isolation, repetitive work, limited social interaction, they can take a toll, even on the most stable individuals. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Sir, I'm not imagining this. I have the security footage, which I'll review personally, he interrupted. But I think we should also have Dr. Lansing evaluate you, just as a precaution. A psychiatric evaluation? Sir, with all due respect, I'm not. It's standard procedure when personnel report impossible events, Hughes. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. The object has unusual properties. We've documented cases where prolonged exposure affects perception. Sir, the deviation I logged yesterday was well within normal parameters, he finished for me. 0.3% is statistically insignificant, but it wasn't normal, not after 15 years of total consistency. I wanted to argue, but the look on Peterson's face told me it would be pointless. I want you to report to medical at 1400 for evaluation, Peterson continued. Then return to your workstation and continue your assigned tasks. If there's been a security breach, we'll handle it. If there hasn't, he let the implication hang in the air. Yes, sir. I stood up, knowing I was dismissed. And Hughes? Peterson called as I reached the door. Don't discuss this with anyone else. Security protocols. Understood. The psych evaluation was brief and clinical. Dr. Lansing asked standard questions about sleep patterns, stress levels, and any previous history of mental health issues. I answered honestly, except when she asked if I'd experienced any unusual thoughts or perceptions lately. I said no, knowing that telling her about my double would only strengthen Peterson's case for my instability. She prescribed a mild sleeping aid and suggested I might be experiencing stress-related paranoia. Common in long-term deployments, she said with a practiced smile. Nothing to worry about. I returned to my workstation, going through the motions of my work while my mind raced with questions. The yellow note remained in my pocket, its 6 words repeating in my mind. You have to leave now. But leave where? And why? The pool was 200 miles from the nearest land. We arrived and departed on scheduled helicopter rotations. There was no leaving outside those parameters. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine tasks and unanswered questions. Daniel avoided me, changing direction whenever he saw me in the corridors. Other researchers carried on as normal, oblivious to the impossibility that had walked into our facility, warned my face, and vanished into thin air. By the time my shift ended, exhaustion had set in. I skipped dinner and headed straight to my quarters, hoping sleep would clear my head. I didn't take the sleeping pill Dr. Lansing had prescribed. I needed to stay alert, to process what was happening. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the security footage in my mind. My double's grim expression, the note, the flash of light as he vanished. Daniel's denial, Peterson's dismissal. The low drone of the object had been a constant background noise for 15 years. I'd learned to tune it out, to let it fade into the white noise of facility systems. But tonight, as I tried to sleep, it seemed louder, more insistent. I rolled over, pulling my pillow around my ears. The sound pushed through, vibrating not just in my ears, but somehow inside my head. The 0.3% deviation I'd noticed yesterday had grown. The pitch changed in waves, rising and falling in patterns I'd never heard before. I sat up, pressing my hands against my ears. It made no difference. The sound wasn't coming through the air. It felt like it was being created inside my skull. As the minutes stretched into hours, I began to hear something else layered within the noise. Whispers. Too faint to make out words, but definitely voices. Multiple voices speaking together, their words just below the threshold of understanding. I got up and paced my small quarters, trying to escape the noise. I tried running the shower to drown it out. I tried playing music through my earbuds. Nothing helped. The whispers continued, growing neither louder nor softer, but remaining constant, a chorus of unintelligible voices riding the waves of the object's noise. By the time my alarm signaled morning, I hadn't slept at all. The voices had kept me company through the night, whispering words I couldn't quite grasp, carrying messages I couldn't understand. As I prepared for another day at the pool, one thing became clear. Something fundamental had changed. The object was no longer silent. It was trying to speak. 3 days of whispers left me exhausted. I dragged myself through my morning routine, the voices from the object still buzzing at the edge of my mind. No matter what I tried, covering my ears, playing music, even running the shower at full blast, they stayed there, a constant murmur just below the level of making any sense. The facility's usual routines gave no comfort as I walked to the research floor. I could barely move, my body running on fumes after 72 hours with barely any sleep. The yellow note stayed folded in my pocket. Those 6 words, always on my mind. You have to leave now. But where would I go? And how? The morning briefing passed in a blur. Director Peterson talked about maintenance schedules and research quotas while I struggled to keep my eyes open. Only when he mentioned the object did I really pay attention. We've detected minor fluctuations in the harmonic resonance, he said, his tone deliberately casual. Well within normal parameters. Team 4 will adjust the monitoring equipment today to compensate. Minor fluctuations. The same thing he'd said about the 0.3% deviation I'd reported. I looked around the room, wondering if anyone else could hear the whispers that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight. The other researchers just looked bored as usual, taking notes and checking schedules. I went back to my station and tried to focus on my mapping assignment. The particles on my screen blurred before my tired eyes, patterns changing and forming again. After 15 years of work, I could usually spot atomic alignments right away. But today, everything looked wrong. "You okay, James?" I looked up to find Thomas Bell, the senior researcher, standing beside my station. His eyes reflected genuine concern behind thick glasses. "Fine," I said automatically. "Just tired." Thomas nodded slowly. "The object's been acting unusual lately. Sometimes that affects people differently." "Have you noticed anything strange?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He paused, looking toward Peterson's office. "Not personally, but I've been here almost since the beginning. After a while, you learn to spot the signs when something's changing." Before I could ask what he meant, Thomas left, called to another station by a junior researcher. The day crawled by, each hour filled with the same boring routines I'd done for 15 years. But something seemed wrong today. Conversations stopped when I got close. Researchers who usually worked with me suddenly found reasons to be somewhere else. By evening, the whispers from the object were louder, like dozens of people talking just out of hearing range. I skipped dinner and went back to my room, hoping I'd be tired enough to sleep through the noise. It didn't work. I stayed awake all night, listening to the voices rise and fall, almost making words before turning back into random noise. Sometimes, one voice would get louder than the others, still impossible to understand, before blending back with the rest. The second day was the same. Work, people avoiding me, whispers. I saw Daniel watching me from across the research floor, with a blank look on his face. When I walked over, he quickly picked up his stuff and went to the testing lab. I kept thinking about the yellow note in my pocket more and more as the day went on. That night, I took the sleeping pill Dr. Lansing had prescribed. It made everything fuzzy but didn't stop the whispers. Instead, I got stuck in this weird half-sleep, where the voices seemed to come from inside my own head, not connected to the object anymore. By the third day after finding the note, I barely felt in touch with reality. I went through the facility doing my work like I was on autopilot, while part of my mind kept trying to understand the whispers. I was heading back from the testing lab when I saw her. Emily stood at the end of the hallway outside the research wing, wearing the same blue sweater she'd had on during our last video call. Her auburn hair looked bright under the overhead lights. She was looking right at me, seeming confused and worried. I stopped suddenly, not believing what I was seeing. Emily couldn't be here. The pool was 200 miles from the nearest land, in the middle of the ocean. No one got in without going through 7 security checkpoints, all needing biometric confirmation. And yet there she was, standing right in front of me. "Emily?" I called, my voice cracking. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any sound came out, 2 security officers appeared behind her. They each took one of her arms, gently but firmly, and began leading her away. "Wait!" I shouted, breaking into a run. "Emily!" She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment before the security team ushered her around a corner and out of sight. I ran after them, but when I turned the corner, the corridor was empty. No Emily, no security personnel, just the same sterile hallway I'd walked thousands of times before. "No," I whispered to the empty air. She was here. I saw her. I ran to the nearest security station, slamming my palm against the communication panel. "Security breach in Corridor E. I need to speak to Chief Sanders immediately." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Robert Sanders in the security office. He looked at the surveillance footage from Corridor E. "There," I said, pointing at the screen as the footage showed me walking down the corridor. "Right there, I see her." On the screen, I stopped suddenly and called out to the empty hallway. There was no Emily, no security officers, Just me, apparently hallucinating in the middle of a secure facility. Hughes, Sanders said carefully. There's no one there. That's impossible. I saw her, Emily, my partner. She was wearing a blue sweater. Security was taking her away. Sanders rewound the footage and played it again. The result was the same. Me, talking to empty space. Could the footage be altered? I asked, grasping at straws. By whom? Sanders countered. And why? Look, Hughes, Director Peterson mentioned you've been under observation. Working here long-term can sometimes cause perceptual issues. I'm not hallucinating, I insisted, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. What was more likely? That Emily had somehow bypassed all security to appear in the pool, or that my sleep-deprived mind was playing tricks on me. Sanders closed the footage and folded his hands on his desk. I'd recommend speaking with Dr. Lansing again. In the meantime, I'll increase security sweeps, just to be thorough. I nodded, knowing further argument would be pointless. As I stood to leave, Sanders added, The object affects people in different ways, Hughes. Even those of us who've been here a long time. It was almost word for word what Thomas Bell had said to me. Back on the research floor, the mood had changed. Researchers huddled in small groups, talking quietly, conversations stopping quickly when I walked up. I caught bits of talk. Unstable, security risk, happened before, that made it clear I was the topic of their concern. I sat at my station and tried to focus on my work, but the screen kept blurring before my eyes. The whispers that had been with me for 3 days seemed louder now, more urgent, as if trying to tell me something important. Daniel Cooper walked past my station without acknowledging me, heading for the central display where the mapping team had gotten together. Their voices carried across the quiet room. It's impossible, one of them said. We've checked the equipment 3 times. Run it again, Daniel ordered. We need to be absolutely certain before we report this. I watched as they huddled around the display, pointing at data patterns I couldn't see from my position. After 15 minutes, they dispersed, looking troubled. Daniel remained at the central console, staring at the screen as if hoping the data would suddenly make sense. I walked over, curiosity overcoming my wariness. What's going on? Daniel jumped, apparently not having heard me approach. Mapping anomalies, he said after a short pause. Nothing to worry about. What kind of anomalies? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Particles appearing in 2 locations simultaneously. Not just quantum entanglement. We're talking about the same particle occupying 2 distinct points in space-time. He gestured to the screen. See these? They should be impossible. The display showed a 3-dimensional model of a section of the object, with certain particles highlighted in red. According to the timestamps, these particles were being recorded in multiple locations at the exact same microsecond. How long has this been happening? I asked. We first noticed it yesterday. It's spreading through the structure. Daniel's voice dropped lower. James, this isn't just unusual. It violates fundamental laws of physics. Before I could respond, my workstation alarm went off, a standard alert showing a completed analysis. I excused myself and went back to my desk. The screen had changed. Instead of the analysis results I'd been expecting, a message filled the display in large text. Time is running out. They know. I looked around quickly. No one was watching me. The message stayed on screen for exactly 5 seconds before disappearing, replaced by the normal analysis report as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the security video from my workstation. The timestamp showed activity from just 10 minutes earlier, while I'd been talking with Daniel at the central display. The video showed my double sitting at my station, typing fast. This time, he looked different. Tired, with a healing cut across his left cheek. He finished typing, looked directly at the camera with a serious look, then stood and walked out of frame. I checked the entry logs for my workstation. According to the system, no one had used my terminal except me. The biometric security, fingerprint, retinal scan, and voice confirmation showed no unauthorized access attempts. Yet the video clearly showed someone who looked exactly like me getting past all security measures. The whispers in my head grew louder, a mess of voices all trying to speak at once. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block out the noise, but it only got worse. I needed to get away from the research floor to think clearly. I signed out of my station and headed for the residential wing, taking my usual route through the facility. But the usual route wasn't there. Where there should have been a T-junction leading to the elevator banks, I found a straight corridor extending farther than I remembered. I stopped, confused, then turned back to retrace my steps. The hallway behind me now ended in a door I didn't recognize. I kept walking, looking for familiar spots. The pool had a logical layout, concentric rings connected by straight corridors like a wheel with spokes. I'd walked through it with my eyes closed during security drills, but now, nothing matched what I remembered. A door that should have led to the cafeteria opened into a storage room. Corridors stretched longer than they should have, or ended abruptly where they once continued. Twice I found myself back at the research floor despite heading in the opposite direction. After 20 minutes of wandering, I rounded a corner and came face to face with Thomas Bell. "James?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing in Section C? Your quarters are in E-Wing." I got lost, I admitted, the words sounding ridiculous even as I said them. "Everything looks, different." Thomas looked at me for a moment, then pointed ahead. "Come on, I'll walk with you." We went through the facility in silence. With Thomas leading, the layout suddenly made sense again. The correct turns appeared where they should be. Known corridors led to the right destinations. Within minutes, we stood outside my room. "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. I don't know what happened. It was like the whole place rearranged itself. Thomas glanced down the empty corridor, then back at me. "James, how long have the whispers been keeping you awake?" I was shocked by the question. I hadn't told anyone about the whispers. Not Dr. Lansing, not Peterson, not even Daniel. "How did you—" "I've been here since they first brought the object to this facility," Thomas interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen what happens when it starts to communicate." "Communicate?" I echoed. "You mean the whispers are coming from the object?" Thomas nodded, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "It doesn't always choose the same person. Last time it was Ryan Ward." The name meant nothing to me, but Thomas said it with significance, as if I should recognize it. "What happened to him?" I asked. Thomas's eyes darted toward the ceiling where I knew security cameras monitored every corridor. "Not here. We can't talk here." He pressed something small and hard into my palm. "Tomorrow, when you're ready to know." He walked away before I could respond. His footsteps bounced down the corridor until he turned a corner and disappeared. I entered my quarters and closed the door, leaning against it as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. The whispers continued their constant murmur, but something had changed. One voice now rose above the others, still unintelligible but clear, as if speaking directly to me. I opened my hand to see what Thomas had given me. It was a small data chip, the kind used for secure file transfers within the facility. I sat at my personal terminal, a basic system that let me access approved entertainment and educational materials, but not the pool's main networks. The chip wasn't compatible with my terminal. It had a different connector type, older than the current standard. I would need access to an older system to read whatever information it contained. I lay down on my bed, the chip held in my hand, the voices from the object getting louder, then softer. I remembered Emily's face as security took her away. Had she been real? A hallucination? Or something else entirely? As I was falling asleep, one whisper broke away from the others, suddenly clear. A woman's voice, strangely familiar. "James, it said. Find me. I spent the week after finding Thomas Bell's data chip feeling really nervous all the time. The whispers never stopped. Sometimes they'd quiet down to a distant murmur. Other times they got so loud they drowned out my thoughts. Emily's voice sometimes came through clearer than the others with that same phrase, "Find me," but never said anything more. I hadn't seen her again since that weird meeting in the hallway. The chip Thomas had given me was useless without an older terminal. I'd carefully looked through the facility for compatible hardware, but most systems had been upgraded years ago. I kept the chip hidden in my quarters, taped beneath my desk drawer where regular searches wouldn't find it. Sleep came in small chunks between the voices. My work quality dropped noticeably. Mapping errors increased, I couldn't focus, and I got dark circles under my eyes. Other researchers now kept their distance, conversations stopping when I walked into rooms. Even Daniel avoided me, though I sometimes caught him watching me from across the lab with a look I couldn't figure out. The summons came during lunch on the 7th day after finding the note. A security officer came to my isolated table in the cafeteria, looking serious. "James Hughes, your presence is requested in conference room A, immediately." I followed him through the hallways, which had thankfully stayed stable since my weird experience a week ago. The officer said nothing as we walked, keeping careful distance between us as if I might be dangerous. Conference room A was the largest meeting space in the facility, usually reserved for quarterly reviews and visiting officials. The security officer stepped aside at the door, letting me enter alone. 3 men waited inside. William Peterson sat at the head of the long table. Robert Sanders stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest. Thomas Bell sat halfway down the table, his fingers nervously adjusting his glasses. "Hughes," Peterson pointed to a chair across from Thomas. "Sit." I took the offered seat, noticing the folder in front of Peterson and the tablet Sanders held. The shiny surface of the conference table showed my tired face, the strain of the past week clear in my appearance. "Do you know why you're here?" Peterson asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I assume it's about my work performance," I said, "among other things." Peterson opened the folder. "In the past 7 days, you've reported seeing impossible things, accused a colleague of lying about security footage, claimed your partner somehow got past all our security systems to appear inside the facility, and gotten lost in hallways you've walked through perfectly for 15 years. Each point landed like a stone. When he listed it that way, I sounded completely unstable. "Dr. Lansing reports you haven't been taking the prescribed medication," Sanders added from his position by the window, "and security logs show you've been accessing restricted areas during off hours." I looked at Thomas, whose face gave nothing away. "Would you like to explain yourself?" Peterson asked. I took a deep breath. Something's happening with the object. It started with that sound change I reported, but it's grown into something more. I hear whispers, voices, all the time now. "Auditory hallucinations," Sanders said flatly. "They're not hallucinations," I insisted, "and I'm not the only one who's noticed changes. The mapping team found particles existing in 2 places at once. That's physically impossible." Peterson and Sanders exchanged looks. "And then there's my double," I continued, knowing how crazy it sounded, but unable to stop. "He's appeared multiple times on security footage, but somehow gets past all biometric checks. He left me warnings. The facility itself has changed, hallways rearranging, rooms appearing where they shouldn't be." "James," Peterson's voice softened, which was somehow worse than his usual clipped tone. "We've seen this before. Long-term exposure to the object affects different people in different ways. We have procedures for this." He pushed a small white pill bottle across the table. "Dr. Lansing has adjusted your medication. This should help with the hallucinations and paranoia." "I'm not hallucinating," I said firmly. "Check the security footage from my workstation. Check the mapping data." "We have," Sanders said. "There are no unauthorized access events at your station. The mapping anomalies were equipment calibration errors, since fixed." They were lying. I'd seen the footage myself. watched my double typing at my station. I'd heard the mapping team discussing the impossibility of their findings. "You need help, Hughes," Peterson continued. "We value your 15 years of service, but if you can't maintain your mental stability, we'll have to consider reassignment." Reassignment? I'd never heard of anyone being reassigned from the pool. Once you were here, you stayed until retirement. That was the deal. "It would be best for everyone," Peterson said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a threat. I felt anger rising. What happened to Ryan Ward? The reaction was immediate. Sanders stood straighter. Peterson's eyes narrowed, and Thomas's hand froze mid-adjustment of his glasses. "Who told you that name?" Peterson asked quietly. "Does it matter?" I countered. "Who was he, and what happened to him?" Peterson closed the folder slowly. Ryan Ward was transferred to another facility 5 years ago. His work here was completed. "That's the official story," I said. "What's the truth?" The room went silent. Sanders moved from the window to stand behind Peterson, a subtle show of united authority. "Hughes," Peterson's voice hardened, "you're stepping into dangerous territory. Classifications exist for reasons beyond your clearance level." "William," Thomas Bell spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly steady, "I think we need to tell him." Peterson turned to Thomas, his expression darkening. "That's not your decision to make." "Look at him." Thomas gestured toward me. "The same signs, the same pattern. If we don't step in, we'll lose another one." "This discussion is classified," Sanders cut in, "and Hughes doesn't have the necessary clearance." "I do," Thomas said quietly. "And I'm using Section 12 of the research charter." Peterson's jaw tightened visibly. Section 12 was rarely mentioned, the rule that allowed senior researchers to share classified information if they believed keeping it secret created a greater risk to the facility or staff. "You're making a mistake," Peterson warned. "Maybe," Thomas admitted, "but I've been here longer than anyone in this room. I've watched this happen before." Peterson and Sanders exchanged looks again, some unspoken message passing between them. "Fine," Peterson finally said. "Limited disclosure, but it stays in this room." Thomas nodded and turned to face me fully. "James, what you're experiencing isn't unique. The object has properties we've been tracking for years but haven't fully included in the general research database." He pulled out his own tablet and slid it across the table. On the screen was a chart titled Space-Time Anomalies, Restricted Access. The graph showed a steady increase in recorded events over the past decade, with a sharp jump in the last 6 months. "For years, we've documented reality distortions near the artifact," Thomas continued. "Equipment recording events that haven't happened yet, or never happened at all. Impossible physics. And yes, duplications of personnel. I stared at the data, feeling a strange mix of relief and deeper worry. "So I'm not hallucinating?" "Not entirely," Thomas said carefully. "The object isn't just an artifact from some ancient civilization. It appears to be changing space-time itself." "Theoretically changing," Sanders corrected. "We have no conclusive evidence." "We have plenty of evidence," Thomas interrupted. "We just can't explain it with current scientific models." He turned another page on his tablet, showing footage I recognized immediately. My double sitting at my workstation, writing the post-it note. "Your security clearance doesn't allow you to access these files," Thomas explained. "That's why when you checked, you only saw what the system was programmed to show you." "You knew about this?" I asked, looking between the three men. "You knew I was telling the truth and you still tried to convince me I was hallucinating?" "Protocol," Sanders said simply. "Need to know basis." "And now I need to know." Thomas nodded slowly. "You're the 4th person to report these specific experiences. First was Keller in 2012, then Matthews in 2015, then Ward in 2018. "What happened to them?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Officially, all three requested transfers to other research sites. Peterson said, his tone carefully neutral. Their departure paperwork is all in order. And unofficially? I pressed. Thomas removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They vanished. Keller during a routine maintenance cycle, Matthews during a supply delivery, and Ward during the only power outage in the facility's history. Vanished? The word hung in the air between us. Without a trace, Thomas confirmed. Their personal things stayed in their quarters. They simply weren't there anymore. And none of you thought this was worth looking into. I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. We looked into it thoroughly, Sanders snapped. Every inch of this facility was searched, every piece of footage reviewed, every possible escape route checked. They couldn't have left the pool through any normal means. Then where did they go? Thomas hesitated, glancing at Peterson, who gave a small nod. We believe the object took them, Thomas said quietly, or more accurately, that they went into the object. The statement hung in the air, its impossibility fighting with the conviction in Thomas's voice. How? I finally asked. We don't know, Thomas admitted. But in each case, the object showed increased activity in the days leading up to their disappearance, the same pattern we're seeing now. I thought about the whispers, the changes in the facility, my double's warning. Why are you telling me this now? Because, Thomas said carefully, we need to understand what's happening, and you're our best connection to the phenomenon. Peterson cleared his throat. What Dr. Bell means is that we'd like you to document your experiences in detail, under controlled conditions, with proper monitoring. The clinical language didn't hide what he was really saying. I was no longer just a researcher. I had become a subject of study. And if I refuse? That would be unwise, Sanders said flatly. Cooperation is in everyone's best interest. You mean you'll force me to comply? Peterson's smile didn't reach his eyes. The object is the single most important scientific discovery in human history. Individual preferences don't matter compared to what we might learn. I looked at Thomas, but his face was blank again, hard to read behind his glasses. Do I have a choice? I asked. There's always a choice, Hughes, Peterson said. But only one lets you continue your work here without complications. The threat was clear. I nodded slowly, buying time to think. What do you want me to do? Report any unusual experiences immediately, Peterson instructed. Submit to daily medical evaluations. Wear monitoring equipment at all times. And take the medication Dr. Lansing has prescribed. It won't block the experiences, just help you maintain perspective. In other words, they wanted to keep me functional enough to observe, but drugged enough to control. I thought about the data chip hidden in my quarters, about Ryan Ward and the others who had vanished, about my double's warning, you have to leave now. All right, I said, pretending to give in. I'll cooperate. Good. Peterson stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Sanders will take you to medical for your first full evaluation. We'll start the monitoring protocol tomorrow. As I got up from my chair, I looked down at the shiny conference table. I could see my face in it. Tired, stressed, but determined. Then, while everyone else was packing up, something impossible happened. My reflection moved by itself. I couldn't move. Completely shocked, while my mirror image looked right at me with an urgent look. His lips made words carefully, with no sound, but clear as day. Find Ryan Ward. I looked up quickly to see if the others had noticed, but they were busy with their tablets and folders. When I looked back at the table, my reflection had returned to normal, copying my movements exactly. Hughes? Sanders called from the door. Medical is waiting. I nodded and followed, my mind going wild. Ryan Ward hadn't transferred. He hadn't escaped, and according to Thomas, he hadn't been taken by the object either. At least, not the way they thought. Ryan Ward was still here somewhere in the pool, and somehow, I needed to find him. I started my search for Ryan Ward the morning after my meeting with Peterson, Sanders, and Thomas. The medication they'd insisted I take made my thoughts fuzzy but didn't stop the whispers. If anything, the voices seemed more persistent, like they were trying to push through the drugs. The facility's personnel database could be accessed from any terminal with proper clearance. I logged into the system during my scheduled research break, making sure no one was watching me. According to official records, Ryan Ward had never worked at the pool. I ran the search 3 times, trying different spellings and ID parameters. Nothing. According to the system, he simply didn't exist. This wasn't really surprising. If they wanted to erase someone, the digital trail would be the first thing to go. Physical records would be harder to completely change. The pool kept backup archives of all personnel files in the administrative wing, partly for security and partly because the old director never trusted computers. Those files needed physical access, not just a login. I waited until my lunch break before heading to the archives. The room wasn't actively monitored. Few people ever needed to look at paper files anymore, but my badge swipe would still be recorded. If anyone checked, I could claim I was researching old mapping techniques. The archive smelled of paper and dust. Filing cabinets lined the room from floor to ceiling, organized by department and year. I went directly to Research Personnel 2018, the year Thomas had mentioned for Ward's disappearance. The cabinet wasn't locked. I pulled open the drawer labeled RZ and looked through the folders. Nothing under W. No Ryan Ward. They'd been thorough, but maybe not thorough enough. I moved to the cabinet with facility incident reports. If Ward had vanished during a power outage like Thomas claimed, there would be records of the event itself, even if his name had been removed. The incident report section was more promising. I found a file labeled Critical Systems Failure, March 12, 2018. Inside was a detailed report of a complete power outage that had affected the entire facility for 6 hours and 23 minutes. According to the report, backup generators hadn't turned on properly. Security systems, including cameras and checkpoints, had gone offline. The object's containment field had stayed working on its own power source, but monitoring equipment had shut down. The timing seemed too convenient. A 6-hour window where no one could track movement through the facility. Perfect conditions for someone to vanish or escape. I took pictures of the report with my personal tablet and kept looking. In the maintenance logs, I found work orders from the week after the outage. Teams had replaced damaged equipment and fixed security systems throughout the facility. One entry caught my attention. Residential quarter E17. Replace damaged ceiling panel and repair adjacent ventilation access. I knew the residential layout pretty well. E17 would be in the eastern wing where junior researchers lived. If that had been Ward's room, the repair work might have been done after he was already gone. I put the files back in their places, making sure to leave everything as I'd found it, and headed back to my workstation. The medication was making me feel slow and tired. I worked mechanically through the afternoon, counting the minutes until my shift ended. That evening, instead of going straight to my room, I took a detour to the eastern residential wing. E section housed about 40 researchers in identical small rooms. Most would be at dinner or evening activities, giving me a short window to look around without attracting attention. I found room E17 easily enough. The door was unlocked, normal for empty rooms. Inside, the space had been cleared of personal belongings. A bare mattress sat on the bed frame. The desk was empty except for a standard terminal. The closet had only a few spare hangers. The room looked like every other empty room in the facility. I closed the door behind me and looked at the ceiling, checking for the panel mentioned in the maintenance log. The standard ceiling in these rooms had white acoustic tiles and a metal grid. One panel directly above the bed looked slightly different from the others, newer, with less yellowing around the edges. I pulled a chair from the desk and stood on it to reach the ceiling. The panel lifted easily, showing the dark space above. I ran my hand along the inside of the opening, feeling nothing but dust. Stretching higher, I reached farther into the ceiling space. My fingers touched something solid pushed back into the corner where the ceiling met the wall, something that didn't feel like part of the ventilation system. I grabbed it and pulled it toward me. A book fell into my hand, a leather-bound journal, worn and dusty. I quickly put back the ceiling panel and stepped down from the chair. The journal had no name on its cover. I sat on the bare mattress and opened it to the first page. Day 872 at the pool, it began. The whispers started 3 days ago. I nearly dropped the book. This was it, Ryan Ward's journal. I flipped through the first few pages, recognizing my own experiences reflected back at me through someone else's words. Day 875. The whispers are getting louder. I can almost make out words now. Dr. Lansing prescribed something for what she calls auditory hallucinations. But I know what I'm hearing is real. Day 877. I saw myself on the security footage today. Except it wasn't me, not exactly. He looked tired, older somehow. He stared directly into the camera as if he knew I would be watching. Day 880. Found a note at my station this morning. Just 4 words. They are lying to you. The handwriting is mine, but I didn't write it. Each entry mirrored what had happened to me, almost exactly. The progression was the same. Whispers, sightings, messages, the feeling that the facility itself was changing. I read faster. On day 883, Ward's entries took a new turn. I accessed the restricted files today. What they're hiding changes everything. The object isn't just an artifact, it's a doorway. It exists in multiple realities at once, occupying the same physical space across different timelines. The research team knows this. They've recorded hundreds of timeline breaches over the past decade, people appearing who shouldn't be here, equipment showing impossible readings, reality itself bending around the object. And I'm not the first to hear the whispers. Keller and Matthews both reported the same experiences before they vanished. The official story is that they transferred out, but the truth is much stranger. I paused, remembering what Thomas had told me during our meeting. 3 others before me, Keller, Matthews, and Ward himself, all gone without a trace. The next entry really freaked me out. Day 885. I found Matthews today, not in our reality, in another one, bleeding through. He looked right at me in the corridor, tried to speak, but no sound came out. Security walked right through him like he wasn't there. In his reality, he's still at the pool, but something's wrong. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. He looked like he was running from something. I think I understand now. The object isn't communicating. It's reaching across timelines. The whispers are voices from other realities where the pool exists. Sometimes those realities overlap with ours, creating the doubles, the impossible messages. Day 887. I saw myself again today. Not on camera, in person. We stood face to face in the research wing. He told me I need to leave before the convergence. Said that in his timeline they couldn't stop it, and everyone at the pool died. Day 890. I've been mapping the security system. There's a way out during supply deliveries. A brief window when the loading bay is connected to the outside world. I've been saving my medication, pretending to take it but storing it instead. Tomorrow night, when the helicopter brings the monthly supplies, I'm going to create a distraction using the pills to trigger a false medical emergency. In the confusion, I can reach the loading bay. If anyone finds this journal, know that the object is more dangerous than they're admitting. It's breaking down walls between realities, and in some of those realities, something terrible has already happened here. That was the final entry. Ryan Ward had planned his escape 5 years ago during a supply delivery. Had he succeeded? The power outage happened the very next day. Was that his distraction, or had something else gone wrong? I checked the date on the last entry, March 11th, 2018. The power outage occurred on March 12th. The timing lined up exactly. I put the journal in my jumpsuit and returned the chair to its original position. As I was about to leave, something else got my attention. A small scratch mark on the wall near the bed. Looking closer, I saw it wasn't random damage, but a deliberately carved set of numbers. 22, 4, 8, 1. A code of some kind? I memorized the numbers and left room E17, making sure the door closed properly behind me. Back in my own quarters, I examined the journal more carefully. Beyond the written entries, Ryan had included detailed drawings, sketches of the object showing subtle changes in its surface that official scans had never detected. He'd mapped what he called thin spots, where reality seemed weaker around the artifact. Most importantly, he'd documented the facility's shipment schedule. According to his notes, supply deliveries came on the second Tuesday of each month, between 22 odd and 23 hours. I checked my facility calendar. Tomorrow was the second Tuesday of the month. The data chip Thomas had given me was still hidden beneath my desk drawer. I remembered the numbers from Ryan's wall, 2248E1. On a hunch, I accessed my terminal settings and changed the input protocol from current standard to version 2.24.81, an older system that might be compatible with Thomas's chip. The terminal accepted the protocol change. I inserted the chip into the port, holding my breath. The screen flickered, then displayed a single file, convergencetheory.pdf. I opened it to find a research paper written by Thomas Bell himself, dated nearly 20 years earlier. The document had been marked classified and removed from all official databases. Thomas's paper proposed that the object wasn't unique to our reality. It existed simultaneously across multiple timelines, serving as an anchor point where different versions of reality could potentially intersect. He theorized that with enough energy, these convergence points could create permanent connections between timelines. The most disturbing section came near the end. If the theories outlined above prove correct, the object represents both unprecedented scientific opportunity and existential risk. A controlled convergence could allow information exchange between realities, advancing our knowledge by centuries. An uncontrolled convergence, however, would likely cause catastrophic reality degradation as multiple timelines attempt to occupy the same space-time coordinates. Such an event could theoretically destroy all connected realities. Thomas had written this 20 years ago, and the research had been buried. Yet here we were, with reality already showing signs of breaking down exactly as he'd predicted. I stayed up late into the night, reading Ryan's journal and Thomas's paper over and over, trying to find anything that might help me understand what was happening. The whispers kept going in my head, sometimes getting almost clear before fading away again. Around 2 a.m., I was too tired to fight sleep anymore. I hid the journal and chip in their spots and lay down without changing out of my jumpsuit. I fell asleep fast, but didn't rest well. I dreamed I was standing in front of the object as it started to crack. Light came out of the cracks, and through them I could see many different versions of the pool. Some destroyed, some changed, some full of weird machines I didn't know. Different versions of me were in these other facilities, some working hard to fix the breaks, others pulling at the walls between worlds. I woke up suddenly at 3:17, the time showing on my bedside display. Something had woken me, not the whispers, but a new sound. A faraway, high-pitched tone that went up and down in a pattern. Alarms. I sat up, wide awake despite my medication and lack of sleep. The facility had different alarm sounds for different emergencies. This particular sound meant a security breach. My terminal flashed with a message for everyone. Attention all personnel. Security Protocol Alpha in effect. Remain in quarters. This is not a drill. Protocol Alpha meant a serious breach. Not just someone where they shouldn't be, but a real threat to the facility or the object. Everyone had to stay put until security checked each area. I tried my door handle. It was locked, as I expected. During Protocol Alpha, only security teams could use the hallways. Through the walls, I could hear people moving in the rooms next to mine. Other researchers woken up by the alarms, probably just as confused as I was. The facility PA system made a crackling sound, and then Robert Sanders spoke, his voice tense but controlled. "Attention all personnel. We have an unauthorized access situation in Research Sector C. Security teams are responding. All personnel must remain in designated safe areas until further notice. Any individual found in corridors without proper authorization will be detained immediately. Research Sector C, where the object was housed." I got really worried as I thought about what this meant. Someone or something had access to the most heavily guarded area of the pool. The whispers in my head suddenly got louder, becoming almost deafening. Dozens of voices speaking urgently all at once, creating a chaos of sound that made it hard to think. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block out the noise. Then, as suddenly as they had gotten louder, the whispers fell into perfect unison. Every voice speaking the exact same words at the exact same time, finally clear and understandable. "It's happening. The convergence has begun." I needed to see what was happening. The alarms kept going off as I walked back and forth in my locked room. I couldn't just sit and wait while whatever convergence the whispers warned about was starting. I tried my door again, even though I knew it wouldn't work. The locks turned on when the alarms started. Security would be too busy dealing with the breach to worry about a researcher breaking quarantine. But I still needed to get out. Looking around my small room, I thought about what to do. The ventilation system was too small to fit through. The walls were solid. But the ceiling, I looked up, remembering Ryan Ward's room and the access panel. I dragged my desk chair to the center of the room and climbed up. The ceiling panels in my quarters were just like those in E17. I pushed upward, and the panel moved. It opened up, showing the dark maintenance space above. I pulled myself up. The space between the ceiling and the next floor was tight, barely 18 inches high, but I could squeeze through it. Dust got all over my uniform as I put the panel back in place behind me. The whispers in my head got louder, more urgent. I moved through the darkness, feeling my way and remembering the facility layout. The ceiling space should connect throughout this section of living quarters. If I could reach the main corridor access point, I might be able to drop down outside the locked areas. It took longer than I expected. Twice I almost went the wrong way that would have taken me away from where I wanted to go. The space got really warm as I moved, and the dust made it hard to breathe. After what felt like forever, I saw a faint light ahead, an access hatch used by maintenance workers. I reached the hatch and looked through its small window. The corridor below was empty with red emergency lights along the walls. I turned the manual release and pushed the hatch open, dropping down into the hallway. The alarms were louder here, sharp and urgent. The automated message kept repeating, "Remain in quarters. Protocol Alpha in effect." I ignored the warning and started moving. The research wing was 3 sectors away, and I needed to go through multiple security checkpoints that normally needed badge access. But during an emergency, certain systems switched to mechanical override so emergency teams could move freely. I hoped those systems were on. The first checkpoint door opened with a hard push, its electronic lock turned off. The facility felt strangely empty as I moved through corridors that should have had security guards. Whatever was happening at the object had drawn all available staff there. As I got closer to the research wing, I heard voices, lots of them. Not the whispers in my head, but actual people. I slowed down, approaching the final set of doors, carefully. The research floor opened up before me, a scene of controlled chaos. Dozens of researchers and security personnel had gathered on the observation deck that overlooked the object's chamber. Some were shouting orders, others checking equipment that had been quickly set up. The normal lights had been replaced by flashing red emergency lights. I stayed against a wall, trying not to be noticed as I moved toward the observation windows. No one paid attention to me. They were all focused on what was happening below. When I reached the edge of the deck and looked down, I almost forgot to breathe. The object had changed. Its perfectly smooth surface now had thin, glowing lines. like cracks in black glass. These lines pulsed with bright white light that seemed to push outward against the object's surface. The usual soft buzz had changed into a tone that made the air vibrate. "Hughes!" A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. Thomas Bell stood before me, his usual neat appearance disheveled. His glasses sat crookedly on his nose, and his lab coat was buttoned incorrectly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no real admonishment in his voice, only urgency. "But since you are, come with me." He pulled me toward a monitoring station set up at the far end of the deck. Screens displayed readings I didn't recognize, energy patterns and waveforms that fluctuated wildly. "It's opening," Thomas said, his voice hushed despite the noise around us. "For the first time since we found it, the object is actually opening." "Opening to what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer from his paper. "To everywhere." Thomas gestured at one of the screens. "These readings suggest space-time distortions extending outward from the object, not just small breaches like before, full-scale tears in reality." Below us, more security personnel entered the chamber, taking positions around the object. They carried weapons, not the standard sidearms used for facility security, but heavier tactical equipment I'd never seen before. William Peterson stood at the center of the observation deck, issuing orders through a communication system. His voice was heard over the general chaos. "I want containment field strength doubled. Get the dampening system online. No one approaches within 20 meters of the artifact." He turned to Sanders beside him. "If anyone tries to breach the perimeter, you are authorized to use lethal force. We cannot allow interaction with the object during an active phase." Sanders nodded grimly and relayed the order to his teams below. "This is what you predicted," I said to Thomas, remembering his paper. "The convergence." Thomas looked surprised. "You saw my paper? How did you—" He stopped himself. "The data chip. You found a compatible system." Ryan Ward's access code helped. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. "You found Ward's—" He shook his head. "Never mind. That's not important now. What matters is what's happening to the object." "Your paper said a convergence could destroy connected realities," I said. "Is that what we're facing?" "It's worse than I predicted." Thomas pointed to another screen showing energy readings. "The object isn't just creating temporary breaches anymore. It's establishing permanent connections between timelines. If it fully activates, the barriers between realities could collapse entirely." The whispers in my head suddenly intensified, becoming a chorus of urgent voices all trying to speak at once. I winced at the noise, pressing my hands against my temples. "The voices," Thomas noticed my discomfort. "They're getting louder, aren't they?" I nodded, unable to speak through the cacophony in my mind. "It's the other timelines," Thomas explained. "As the walls between realities thin, you're hearing more versions of this moment happening simultaneously." I forced myself to focus past the noise. Looking back down at the object chamber, I looked around at all the personnel, researchers taking readings, security maintaining the perimeter, technical staff adjusting equipment. That's when I saw him. Moving against the flow of people, a person in a navy jumpsuit made his way steadily toward the object. From above, I could see the top of his head. Brown hair flecked with gray, cut short in a familiar style. It was me. Another version of me. This wasn't the same double who had left the warnings. That version had looked haggard, desperate. This one moved with purpose and confidence, his posture straight and determined. Security personnel seemed not to notice him as he slipped between them, closing the distance to the object meter by meter. "Thomas!" I grabbed his arm, pointing. "Look, down there." Thomas followed my gesture, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "Is that me?" "Yes. But that's not the same double who left me warnings." I watched as my counterpart navigated around a security team. "This is someone else. Another timeline bleeding through," Thomas muttered. "But he seems solid, physical. He's actually here, not just an apparition." The double paused, like he could tell someone was watching him. He looked up, right at the observation deck. Our eyes met across the distance. I felt a chill. His face was mine, but I couldn't quite read his expression. Determined, but with something cold about it. This wasn't a version of me trying to help or warn. This was someone with his own plans. And he was heading straight for the object. "He's going to breach the perimeter," I said. "I need to stop him." Before Thomas could respond, I was moving, pushing through the crowd toward the stairs that led down to the chamber. Behind me, I heard Thomas calling my name, but I didn't stop. I ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The security checkpoint at the bottom would normally prevent unauthorized access to the chamber level. But in the confusion, a researcher had propped the door open with an equipment case to allow teams to move through quickly. The chamber level was even more chaotic than the observation deck. The object was pulsing with light. The air felt different, like it was filled with energy. I looked around for my double, spotting him on the far side. He had reached the security perimeter and was waiting, watching the patrol patterns of the guards. I pushed through the crowds, keeping my head down to avoid drawing attention. Security was focused on the object and the perimeter, not on individual researchers moving through the background. My double made his move, timing it perfectly between guard rotations. He slipped past the 20-meter boundary marker, now in the restricted zone around the object. I changed direction, circling around to intercept him from the side. The whispers in my head had become a roar, but I forced myself to focus on the physical world around me. The double reached a control panel near the object's support structure. His hands moved over the interface with practiced ease, entering commands I couldn't see from my position. I was 10 meters away when he sensed me coming. He turned, his eyes, my eyes, meeting mine again. For a moment, we both froze, like mirror images facing each other in the chaos. Then he ran. I chased after him, following as he moved away from the object and toward a maintenance access door. He slammed through it, and I followed seconds later. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and narrow, branching into a maze of service tunnels that ran throughout the facility. The alarms were muffled here with red emergency lights, creating pools of light between dark areas. I could hear his footsteps ahead, bouncing off the metal walls. The corridor forked, and I hesitated for a split second before choosing the right path. The whispers guided me, suddenly all pointing me toward him. The corridor ended in a small junction room filled with pipes and electrical conduits. My double stood at the far end, his back against the wall. He was trapped. "Who are you?" I demanded, staying near the doorway to block his escape. He smiled, a strange expression to see on my own face. "I'm you, James. Just not your version of you." His voice was mine, but the tone was slightly different, more confident, with an edge I didn't recognize in myself. "What were you doing at the control panel?" I asked, taking a cautious step forward. "Finishing what we started long ago." He gestured vaguely toward where the object would be, beyond the walls. "The convergence is happening whether you try to stop it or not. My double, the other one who left me warnings, he told me to leave," I said. "He was trying to help me." The trapped double laughed. "Is that what you think? He wasn't trying to help you. He was trying to remove you as an obstacle." I stopped my advance. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, James." He crossed his arms, mirroring a gesture I often made when explaining something. "There are countless versions of us across countless timelines. In some of them, we work to open the doorway. In others, we try to keep it closed." The whispers in my head suddenly fell silent, as if listening to our conversation. "The object," my double continued, "isn't just an artifact. It's a node, an anchor point that exists in every connected reality. Its creators placed these nodes throughout the multiverse, waiting for the right conditions to activate them." "Its creators?" I asked. "You know who made it?" "Not who. What?" His eyes gleamed in the red emergency lighting. "They exist outside our concept of reality. Beings who experience all possible timelines simultaneously. They created the objects as doorways, ways to enter linear reality. I thought back to Thomas's paper, the warnings about catastrophic reality degradation if multiple timelines converged. You're helping them, I realized. You're trying to open the doorway. He nodded. In my timeline, I've been working with them for years. They showed me possibilities beyond anything you can imagine. And the cost? I asked. Thomas Bell's research suggests a full convergence could destroy connected realities. Bell doesn't understand. It's not destruction. It's transformation. My double took a step toward me. Yes, this version of reality will end, but something new will take its place. Something better. Who are you to make that decision for everyone? I felt anger rising in me. For Emily? For every person in this facility? For the entire world? At Emily's name, something flickered across his face, a brief shadow of doubt. She's alive in my timeline, he said quietly. But different. They all are. Once you see the full picture, you understand that individual lives are just variations on a theme. What matters is the pattern, not the individual notes. That's not how humanity works, I argued. We're not just patterns. Each life matters. He shook his head, looking sorry for me. That's such a limited perspective. But I wouldn't expect you to understand. Your timeline has only experienced the object as a passive artifact. In mine, it's been communicating for years. I suddenly got it. The whispers. They're not just from other timelines breaking through. They're deliberate communications. From the creators, yes. They speak to receptive versions of us across all timelines. Some listen. Some, like your warning double, fight against it. It's all part of the selection process. Selection for what? To see which version of James Hughes will help open the door, and which will try to keep it closed. He spread his arms wide. A cosmic experiment with countless iterations all happening simultaneously. The facility rumbled around us, the walls vibrating. The object's energy was growing stronger. It's already started, my double said. The program I initiated is amplifying the object's natural resonance. The convergence will reach critical mass within hours. How do I stop it? I demanded. He laughed again. You don't. That's what your warning double didn't understand. For every version of us trying to prevent the convergence, there's another working to ensure it happens. The creators made sure the odds were perfectly balanced. Another tremor, stronger this time, shook the room. A pipe above us burst, releasing a cloud of steam. I need to get back, my double said, moving as if to leave. I stepped into his path. I'm not letting you go. You don't have a choice. His hand moved to his pocket, pulling out a small device I didn't recognize. In approximately 4 minutes, the reality boundaries near the object will become permeable enough for me to return to my own timeline. My work here is done. I'll alert security. They'll shut down whatever program you started. They can't. It's already integrated with the object's own processes. He checked the device in his hand. Besides, you won't be alerting anyone. He moved with surprising speed, lunging forward and slamming me against the wall. I fought back, wrestling with my double in the narrow space. It was weird, like fighting myself, each of us knowing what the other would do next. We crashed into the pipes lining the walls. Steam and liquid sprayed around us as connections broke. The floor got slippery and dangerous. My double had the advantage. He was clearly ready for this fight. As we struggled, he pushed me toward the broken section of piping. Nothing personal. He grunted as he gave a final shove, just ensuring the timeline plays out correctly. I lost my footing on the wet floor and fell backward. My head hit something hard on the wall. My head hurt badly, and I couldn't see clearly. As my vision got worse, I watched my double fix his jumpsuit and look at the device again. He looked down at me with what seemed like almost regret. If it helps, he said, in the majority of timelines where the convergence succeeds, we survive. Some version of us always makes it through. I tried to respond to get up, but I couldn't move. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was my double walking calmly out of the room, leaving me alone as the facility shook around us. The whispers came back as everything went dark, hundreds of voices speaking together. Choose your side. The door is opening. My head throbbed like someone had taken a hammer to my skull. I touched the back of my head and my fingers came away sticky with blood. For several minutes I lay on the wet maintenance room floor, trying to piece together what had happened. My double. The fight. The object changing. The whispers had grown into a constant roar in my mind, no longer at the edges of my consciousness but front and center, demanding attention. I pushed myself upright, fighting waves of nausea and dizziness. The floor beneath me trembled continuously now, small vibrations broken up by stronger jolts that made the pipes rattle. Choose your side, the voices repeated, a mantra that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the facility's emergency lights. I staggered to my feet, using the wall for support. I needed to get back to the object chamber. Whatever my double had done, there might still be time to stop it. The maintenance corridor spun around me as I took my first unsteady steps toward the exit. When I reached the door and pushed it open, I found myself looking not at the corridor I'd entered from, but at an unfamiliar room filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Massive generators buzzed, connected to a central platform where a scaled-down version of the object sat encased in glass. A woman in a white lab coat looked up from a control panel, her eyes widening at my appearance. "Dr. Hughes, you're supposed to be in Sector 4 for the activation sequence," she said. I backed away, pulling the door closed. This wasn't right. This wasn't any part of the pool I recognized. I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. When I finally got enough courage to open the door again, the strange room was gone, replaced by the correct corridor leading back to the object chamber. The tremors were stronger now, making it hard to walk straight. As I moved through the corridor, the walls seemed to change, becoming see-through in spots. Through these clear sections, I could see other spaces, labs with different equipment, military sleeping quarters, even what looked like prison cells. Other timelines, I realized. Other versions of the pool leaking into our reality. The corridor ahead of me got super long, then suddenly short again. A door showed up on my left where no door should be. It opened as I passed, and I saw a huge open room where workers loaded what looked like weapons onto a conveyor belt. The object, much bigger in this reality, sat in the middle of the room, its surface covered with detailed markings. I walked faster, ignoring the doors and windows into other pools that appeared and disappeared around me. The whispers got louder the closer I got to the object chamber, turning into a storm of competing voices. The final security door leading to the chamber wouldn't open when I pressed my badge against the reader. The electronic system was breaking down as reality became unreliable. I stuck my fingers into the small gap between the doors and pulled, pushing hard against the mechanism until something broke with a metallic noise. The chamber beyond was barely recognizable. The object now floated several feet above its container, the cracks in its surface wider and more numerous, pouring bright white light into the room. The air looked wavy around it, and in those distortions I could see pieces of other places, other times. Most of the security staff had left, but a small group of researchers stayed gathered around a modified control station at the far end of the room. I saw Daniel Cooper there, telling two technicians what to do as they moved cables from a damaged panel. I made my way across the chamber, keeping my distance from the floating object. The light coming from it bent in weird ways that hurt to look at directly. "Hughes," Daniel called out when he saw me approach. His face showed equal parts relief and suspicion. "Where have you been? We thought you were evacuating with the others." "I ran into some trouble," I said, touching the back of my head where the blood was beginning to dry. "What's happening? What did my double do?" Daniel's expression got darker. "You saw him too? Security footage caught someone who looked like you accessing the primary containment controls. He initiated a feedback cascade in the dampening field. Instead of containing the object's energy, it's amplifying it. The other researchers looked up when I mentioned my double. They all looked scared and tired. "The object is awakening," said a woman I recognized as Dr. Kaminsky from theoretical physics. She pointed to a monitor showing energy readings that spiked and dipped in patterns too regular to be random. "It's not just emitting energy, it's broadcasting a signal across multiple dimensions like a beacon." "A beacon for what?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer from what my double had told me. "For them," Daniel said simply. He nodded toward another monitor showing thermal imaging of the chamber. In the feed, strange shapes moved around the object, forms that weren't visible to the naked eye but registered on the infrared spectrum. They weren't human shapes. "The object was never just an artifact," Dr. Kaminsky continued. "It's a doorway, and now it's opening." Another violent tremor shook the room. A section of wall on the far side just disappeared, showing a jungle that definitely wasn't part of our building. Through the gap, I saw weird structures among the trees, shapes that bent in ways that didn't make any sense. "The convergence is causing multiple realities to merge," Daniel explained, his voice tight with controlled panic. "If we can't stop it, our universe will be permanently damaged. The laws of physics will break down as competing realities try to occupy the same space." Everything my double had said came rushing back. The creators existing outside our concept of reality. The object as a doorway. The selection process to see which version of me would help open the door. "It wasn't trying to help me," I said aloud, the realization finally clicking into place. "What?" Daniel looked confused. "My double, the first one, the one who left me warnings to leave." I shook my head, understanding the truth at last. He wasn't trying to save me. He wanted to remove me as an obstacle to the object's awakening. "What are you talking about, Hughes?" Daniel grabbed my arm. "Focus. We need solutions, not conspiracy theories." I pulled away from his grip. "Ryan Ward's journal. I found it. He documented everything. The whispers, the doubles, the facility changes. But more importantly, he mapped what he called thin spots around the object." Daniel looked shocked. "Ward? You found his journal?" "In his quarters. He hid it in the ceiling before he disappeared." I turned to the nearest terminal. "I need to access my files. I photographed his schematics." Dr. Kaminsky moved over so I could log in. My credentials still worked even though system problems were causing issues all over the facility. I pulled up the pictures I'd taken of Ward's journal pages and put them on the main screen. "Here," I pointed to Ward's detailed drawings of the object. He identified points where reality seemed weaker around the artifact. According to his notes, these points aren't random. They form a pattern, like circuit nodes. Daniel studied the images, his scientific training overcoming his distrust of me. "These correspond with the energy emission points we've recorded. But what does that tell us?" "It tells us how to close the door," I said. "Look at his notes here." Ward theorized that the object responds to specific electromagnetic frequencies. If it's broadcasting a signal now, we might be able to broadcast one back, create a feedback loop. "That could work," Dr. Kaminsky said, excitement creeping into her voice. "Instead of trying to suppress the object's power, which we've been failing at, we redirect it back on itself. Force the artifact to close itself." Daniel completed the thought, already turning to the controls. "We'll need to reconfigure the containment field emitters." The next 30 minutes went by quick. The remaining technicians worked to rewire the containment systems based on our makeshift plan, while Dr. Kaminsky figured out the exact frequencies needed to match the object's emissions. I looked over Ward's diagrams to find the best spots for our modified emitters. All around us, reality kept mixing together. The opening to the jungle got bigger, and new holes showed up, one with an underwater version of the facility, another showing a version that looked like it was made from one big rock. Shadowy people walked through our space, researchers and security staff from other timelines who couldn't see us, just like we couldn't quite see them. The whispers in my head changed their message. Close the door and all possibilities end. Keep it open and become more. I ignored them and stayed focused on what I was doing. Daniel and I worked together, our earlier problems forgotten because of the danger we were in. He didn't ask how I knew about the object or why I understood what was happening. There wasn't time. As we finished the modifications, another strong shake hit the facility. Ceiling panels fell down around us, and the floor cracked in places. Warning alarms I'd never heard before started blaring throughout the room. "Structural integrity failing," announced an automated voice. "All personnel must evacuate immediately. Repeat, all personnel must evacuate immediately." Daniel looked up from his work, his face grim. "That's it. We've got maybe 20 minutes before this whole place comes down around us." "The helicopter," Dr. Kaminsky said. "The supply delivery. It should still be at the landing pad. We can use it to evacuate." Daniel nodded. "But someone needs to stay to activate the feedback loop. The timing has to be precise or it won't work." Everyone in the small group gave each other looks. No one spoke the obvious. Whoever stayed would likely not make it out. The feedback loop would need constant adjustment as the object's emissions changed and the building was falling apart around us. "I'll do it," I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. "I'll stay." Daniel started to protest, but I cut him off. "I've spent 15 years studying this thing. I understand Ward's notes better than anyone. And it's me the object has been trying to communicate with." I gestured around us. "Whatever's happening involves me, multiple versions of me. It makes sense that I should be the one to finish this." Dr. Kaminsky touched my arm briefly. "Are you sure?" I wasn't, not really, but I nodded anyway. "Get everyone else out. I'll maintain the feedback loop as long as I can." There wasn't time for long goodbyes. The remaining team gathered what essential data they could while I familiarized myself with the control setup. Daniel was the last to leave. "The emitters will need constant recalibration," he explained hurriedly. "The object will try to change frequencies to break the loop. You'll need to match it each time." "I understand." He handed me a small radio. "We'll maintain contact as long as possible. Once you're sure the feedback loop is stable, get to the northern emergency exit. It's the most structurally sound part of the facility. If you can reach it, we'll try to come back for you." We both knew that was unlikely, but I appreciated the gesture. Daniel hesitated a moment longer, then extended his hand. I shook it. "Good luck, Hughes," he said simply, then turned and jogged toward the exit. Alone in the control room, I sat down in the chair and looked at the monitors. The modified containment field was ready. All I needed to do was activate it at the exact moment when the object's emissions hit their peak. On the screens in front of me, the energy readings kept going up. The object in the chamber below was floating in the air, turning slowly, its cracks getting wider and showing a blinding light inside. The whispers in my head got louder. Thousands of voices from countless timelines all talking at once. I put my hands over the activation controls, watching the energy curve go up toward its highest point. When it hit the calculated threshold, I turned on the system. It worked right away. The modified emitters fired, making visible beams of energy that hit the object at the exact points Ward had found. The light coming from the cracks suddenly changed direction, going back into the artifact instead of out. The object shook, spinning faster. "Feedback loop established," announced the system. "Field integrity at 87% and holding." I breathed out slowly. It was working. The object's emissions were being sent back into itself, forcing the doorway to close. On the security monitors that still worked, I could see the reality breaches around the facility beginning to seal themselves, the glimpses of other timelines fading. The radio made a crackling sound with Daniel's voice. "Hughes, status report." "Feedback loop is stable," I replied. "The breaches are closing." "Confirmed. We're seeing the effect throughout the facility. The object's energy signature is decreasing." A pause. "The helicopter is loaded. We can hold another 5 minutes, max." "Go," I said. "I need to stay and maintain the loop." If it fails before the process completes, I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what would happen. Understood, Daniel said after a long moment. Good luck, James. The radio went quiet. I looked back at the monitors, tweaking the field settings as the object's output changed. Whenever it tried to switch frequency, I adjusted to keep the feedback loop going. The whole facility kept shaking around me. Parts of the ceiling had fallen in the room below, but the object still hung above all the damage, its light getting dimmer as the cracks on its surface slowly closed up. While I worked, I spotted security screens I hadn't seen before. They showed different areas of the pool, but what shocked me was that each screen showed a different version of me. In one, I was running to the helicopter pad with the others. In another, I stood right in front of the object, with my arms out like I was hugging it. A third showed me in William Peterson's office, calmly watching the chaos through the windows while Peterson begged me about something. Dozens of screens, dozens of James Hughes, all making different choices at this critical moment. I finally got what my double meant. The creators were testing every possible version of me in different timelines. Which one would help open the door? Which would try to close it? Which would run? Which would stay? Which would fight? As I watched these other versions of myself, the whispers turned into one clear voice that seemed to speak from all around me. You have chosen. The object's rotation slowed. The cracks in its surface narrowed to thin lines, then to hairline fractures, and finally disappeared. The light dimmed until the artifact was dark and quiet in the air. Back to the smooth, featureless shape I'd studied for 15 years. I sat alone in the control room, surrounded by blinking monitors showing dozens of versions of myself throughout the facility, each dealing with the results of their choices. Outside, I heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors as Daniel and the others left. The feedback loop stayed steady, with readings showing the object going back to its inactive state. I looked at the structural integrity warnings. The immediate danger was passing, but the facility was too damaged to stay standing. I had about an hour before the remaining supports failed. Just enough time to reach the northern emergency exit if I left soon, but I stayed seated, watching the monitors. The alternate versions of myself were disappearing one by one as the timeline breaches closed. Reality was becoming stable, with choices becoming permanent. Soon, only my timeline would remain. I looked down at the object, now back in its cradle. It was quiet in my mind for the first time in days. The whispers were gone, the voices silent. I'd made my choice. On the last working monitor, I saw the supply helicopter taking off from the pad, turning sharply against the wind coming from the Pacific. Daniel and the others had made it out. Whatever happened to me now, I'd made sure they would survive to warn the world about what was hidden under the ocean. The lights in the control room blinked, then became steady. I turned back to the instruments, checking the final stages of the feedback loop as the facility made noise around me.